Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeaways podcast. On today's episode, we are discussing the relationship that exists between technology and media, right? And I have the perfect person who I can have this conversation with. I'm with Tshepo Tshabalala. He's from the JournalismAI. He will share more on his role there and what it entails. But yeah, hi man. Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeaways podcast, Tshepo. How are you, man?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with you, right? I read your profile, I think 2 weeks back, like on Communic, and I thought it was quite like insightful, your journey on how you got, like into journalism, and then like eventually you got to like explore the relationship that exists between technology and media. So, can you just share, a bit on how you got to be like in journalism and how that journey has been, and how you got to where you are currently at Journalism AI?
Yeah, I guess I can say I'm one of the lucky few who knew at a young age that I wanted to be in journalism. A lot of the times when we were about to finish high school, a lot of people struggle to figure out, what to do professionally. And I think I was lucky in the sense that I had found my, in inverted commas, my passion quite early on. And so going to university was quite easy because at least I was doing what I wanted to do. And getting into the industry, I think was also fairly easy in the sense that things aligned, with a bit of hard work, building the right relationships. I was able to get into the right rooms, the right spaces, and work for platforms and publications that I could only have dreamed of. Obviously, when you're a student, you have an idea or a dream to work with certain organizations that you're used to growing up, and university sort of opens you up to a wide range of publications. And so I was lucky that my first gig in journalism was with Reuters, and that sparked my love for financial journalism. And then through that, I guess I was able to move from financial journalism into online journalism when I went to Business Day. So doing a bit of both of business journalism, financial journalism, as well as online. And then from there, moving on into trying to document, I guess, the changes in journalism and media innovation in Africa. And I guess having done that for like a couple of years, having focused on innovation in Africa, that sort of segued easily into working in AI and journalism. And so that was a really nice flow into having come into the project. It's been 3 years now into the role, and it's been really exciting. This journey from traditional reporting to media innovation has taught me that tech is usually like the easy part, and culture change is sort of one of the hardest part. And I guess I've been lucky in the sense that I'm in a place where I work globally, and I get to learn from other cultures, other people. So it's been a good experience so far.
I want to start at your early years at Business Day, right? And this was, I think, like in the mid 2010s. How was, because like a majority of the online publications back then were usually just like like your blogs, like a majority of the publications did not have like a solid kind of like a online strategy. How was the environment then?
Funny enough, at the time, I think I was still quite young. I mean, I think I was what 2010, right? I think it was what 25, 26 at the time. And I was not interested in online journalism at all. I didn't understand it. I was like, you know what? We have to be hardcore reporters, be in the field, talk to people. And funny enough, I think maybe a few years before, when I was at Reuters, I think one of the online editors tried to co-opt me into, being part of the team as the intern to learn about online journalism. And I just didn't get it. I'm like, why would I waste my time sitting at a table uploading stories onto the internet? No, I want to be out in the field, talking to people. And so I think back then, it was, I guess I was still a budding journalist. I did not know enough to know what the state of online journalism or digital journalism was. And I think it was the early days of social media as well, so the newspaper was still king, radio was still king, TV journalism was still, or broadcast journalism rather, was the go-to platform. And so at the time, we were still slowly building up websites and distributing content to online. And so I think, yeah, post that, I think that's when sort of things started becoming more visible, more present online with social media, etc.
Yeah. And then I wonder how was the, like the engagement then? Like what kind of people were like engaging with content? Because I'm assuming like in 2010, not many people had access to the internet, etc., etc. How was engagement? How did you find it back then?
I think at the time I think everybody was excited, right? In the sense that this was a new era, a new place where people could get news. And so it was an opportunity to be creative and reach new audiences that we've never reached before. It was an opportunity to reach corners of the continent that you could never reach before, or you could only reach through television, and now you could reach online. Publications or platforms were able to now build their own audiences and their own following, and also be able to interact with consumers of the news instantly. I think, back in the day when X was still Twitter, it was a good time to actually get immediate feedback from, users and consumers of news platforms. So it was really an exciting time, but challenging as well, in the sense that newsrooms had to adapt to that, whereas back before then you were used to getting letters to the editors, and now here you are getting live feedback on social media, and you would be able to change and update things as you went along. So I think it was a really testing time, but also exciting at the same time, full of opportunities, but also perils, in the sense that a lot of the times we were all experimenting, and half the time did not know what we were doing. I think even now, and I guess that's the beauty of technology, in that you keep trying, keep testing, iterating until you get it right.
Speaking of experimenting, right? You got your feet wet really like in media innovation, like a Gem Lab, right? And I remember I used to be like a huge fan of Gem Lab because I just thought like the like platforms and publications which were like coming out of Accelerator were quite like interesting, right? So just share more like on your early days at Gem Lab, and what you really learned about the state of the innovation like in the media landscape in Africa back then.
I think at the time we really wanted to see what innovative, creative, independent news ideas could come out from the country, but also from the rest of the continent. And the accelerator was a way to really test that out and see what innovation was there. A lot of the time you always look to the West for innovation, but on the continent, innovation was different. I remember when we were still conceptualizing or like putting our first newsletter together, there was this organization in Burundi, and I think they were doing, was it listening groups in Burundi? And that was innovative, whereas they would record shows and then play it back to the community after they were live on radio. And that was innovative in the sense that information was still getting to parts of the country that were not connected to the grid, or who could still get information, but they struggle to have electricity, And so that was really, really amazing. And of course, you get the usual innovative stuff. I think at the time as well, podcasting was starting to be a thing. And you had platforms that were trying to build podcasts for news. I mean, now for radio stations rather. Now, radio stations produce their own podcasts. So there was like a lot of innovative platforms that were coming out. And I guess, it went on for like, 3-4 years, different accelerators. And some of those platforms are still out there doing incredible work.
If you look at the startups who are doing like this innovation then, right? What were the most prominent challenges that you came across, and how did you guys at Gem Lab kind of try to help them to to bypass those particular challenges?
I think the challenges varied, but I think the most common challenge was access to funding. Especially a lot of these were non-profits organizations. So access to funding to be able to build whatever that they're working on. Access to data was the other thing. A lot of the data on the continent wasn't digitized. And so, a lot of them needed to do their own sort of audience research at the time, because, it was difficult to find that type of work. So a lot of the times we had to teach the platforms to do their own groundwork or their own research in order to support whatever that they were working on. I remember, for example, there was a platform called Quote This Woman, and they were trying to build a platform to encourage news organizations to quote more women and have more women representation on news platforms. And it was quite difficult finding women to add to their database so that they could easily give this to news organizations, etc. So, a lot of them were really starting from zero. And at GemLab, our work was really to help them build the connections as well with relevant organizations, relevant people who could support them. And so, the accelerator really was beyond the funding, was more about capacity building and making sure that these startups were fit for purpose and they were able to grow even beyond the accelerator program. So that was really the goal for it. Yeah.
You touched on an important point in that the challenges that you guys were trying to address a GM Lab is still pretty much the same challenges that we have. I'll give an example. I mean, over the last 10 or so years, in Africa, we have seen a significant inflow of VC capital, right? But if you look at the percentage of the VC capital that went towards media innovation, right? I mean, I don't have the percentage per se, but I do not think it's even a 10%, right? I mean, a couple of USDS and your tech cabal have been able to get funding, but even up to now, right? It's still so hard to be able to to get the funding for media. And I think I've spoken to a couple of people in media, and they only say this, that media is such a tough kind of business to back via a VC, right? Why? Because a VC is looking for an insane amount of growth over a few years, right? But if you're running, say, a podcast or a publication, etc., it's going to be so incredibly hard to be able to get that growth. So I guess that brings me to the question. We have had the same problems for a couple of years now. Where do you think we are going wrong in trying to address these particular problems, especially around your funding, etc.?
I think I don't want to say we go where we are going wrong. I think the challenge is that what we're struggling to do as journalism platforms or as journalists and media practitioners is selling the value that is journalism in a space where people have become content creators, or people have become both creators and consumers of content. And so it's really trying to sell our USP to people. I think that's the most difficult part. And I think the other part as well is that you're seeing a lot of media getting muzzled, or a lot of people trying to control the media or buy media for power. And so that's sort of the challenge, it's in that, in as much as we're struggling to sell or show our value, there are those who see the value but misuse the media for their own purpose. And I think that's sort of the biggest challenge, in that we are not like other industries where people see the immediate value instantly. when you talk about health, you are getting help for your whatever ailments, whatever you have. When you're talking about technology, you're seeing the value immediately that, I can open Google Maps and it will take me to wherever I'm going. The value is instant. Whereas with news, initially, the goal or the purpose was to really inform and educate people. Right now, when there's just so much information that people can find on the internet, what makes publications or news organizations valuable when we can find that information elsewhere? And I think that's the biggest part about attracting funding and attracting support for a lot of media organizations.
Before we jump more to the conversation, like around like AI, I want to get your thought on this, right? I mean, over the last few years, we have seen quite like an explosion of these independent content creators who like share news and views and opinions, etc. And they've grown quite a lot, like especially on the continent. What's overall thought on that? And I'm asking this from a POV that we kind of have to strike a balance between, okay, like it's great to have people who are kind of doing like a democratizing of news on the continent, but also like it's important to have news out there that's that's been vetted, etc., etc. So what do you think of that growth in the online content creators and news platforms?
I think like anything, there's a good and bad to everything. And I think there's a good and bad to anybody being able to pick up a mic and become a podcaster. No offense. Or anybody picking up a phone and recording themselves and talking about what the news is not reporting about. And I think, and I always go back to how, I guess, when you're a trained journalist, you are taught to read widely, consume as much information as you can from different platforms to get different ideas and opinions from different people, and then you form your own judgment. And I think that is training that needs to be taught in high school already. Media literacy is something that has become so important that, especially now in an age where there's just a lot of information everywhere. Back in the day, we knew that we had 7 newspapers, 3 TV channels, and we could really have a unique understanding of the world. Right now, there's just a lot of information, so it's difficult for individuals to consume sufficient information and still be able to make or inform their own judgments based on the information they have. I think what's challenging right now as well is misinformation and disinformation. Trying to sort out fact from fiction or the lies as well. So it's become challenging with having a lot of voices within the information ecosystem. It's a good and a bad thing in that it's removed the barrier to entry into building or people building their own media companies. But at the same time, it's become challenging in the sense that a lot of consumers of news don't know who to trust. Legacy news organizations, and I guess also like it goes back to like high numbers of unemployment, where and a lot of restructuring and companies downsizing, in that a lot of news organizations are not, or at least the legacy ones, are not as big as they were or don't have the muscle to produce content the way they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so a lot of these news organizations, at least the legacy ones that we can say were trusted, are struggling to keep up with all the content creators, etc. And so as individuals or as consumers, we need to figure out who we trust and how we will consume that information that we trust, but still also making sure that we don't live in a bubble, because you can quickly live in a bubble when you consume a certain type of media only, and you don't get a full perspective of what else is happening around you. So I think it makes it difficult, but also great in the sense that there's been new entrants and new voices that you can easily access, whereas before you were limited to certain publications.
And also, like, on the topic of the bubble, right? I think also, like, it's complex in that, the human brain wants to always be told that is right? So if you have like a content creator who's always like, who shares your POV, you're going to like kind of like be like inclined to follow them more, to like engage with their content. Unlike if you have like a newspaper where, like on this page you agree with the news, and then like on the next page you're like, this is not good, right? So I guess like it's like it's a bubble that you're talking about, in that like it like it's a confirmation kind of bias, in that you get the news that you want to hear and you keep engaging, and then you just keep getting the same news over and over again, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the perils of having a lot of content creators, because you really don't want to consume information that you don't want to. And I guess people have choice, right? And if you're not on certain platforms or following certain people, you're going to miss certain information. But I guess the other side of it is you'll get people who become news avoiders. And because there's just so much negative and vile content out there, people start staying away from news or the internet, and just switch off. And they also too live in a bubble. They forget what's happening around them, and that in itself is a problem, in the sense that they're missing out on potentially key information that they should have access to. But because their brains, their mental health has been affected by this plethora of amplification of bias, of stereotyped news or information, um, it just becomes exhausting to constantly be switched on or locked on into news. And so you end up pulling back and avoiding news, to preserve your mental health, essentially.
Yeah, man. And I guess like it's not always true that like the ignorance is bliss, because we can't live without news, right? Because that, like it's an important part of the society that we live in, right? So I want to jump now into the crux of our conversation, right? You joined the Journalism AI team in I think 2023. Look, I think the media has always had a weird kind of relationship with technology, in that like in a couple of years it's good and then it becomes bad. I'll give an example. When like like a Facebook came along, it was quite like an important distribution channel for media platforms, right? And then they changed the algorithms to video. Now like media platforms were forced to pivot to video, etc., etc. So, in this kind of, relationship, I want to jump straight to it. How do you think AI is going to impact the media in Africa, particularly?
I think, like any other technology, I think, or let me rather say this, I think as Africa, we need to move from being a testing ground for a lot of Western tech companies, and we need to figure out how do we become builders of our own solutions. The continent has a lot of languages, we have a lot of diversity, and there's massive opportunity there. We can build our own models where a lot of Western platforms are unable or are not even building platforms in different languages. I mean, for example, in South Africa, we have 11 official languages. Yes, we speak English, but there's another 10 official languages that are not baked into a lot of the large language models. And so we need to figure out, as the continent, how do we become a builder within this ecosystem, making sure that we're building local language data sets and tools that news organizations can use to serve their audiences. You think about the SABC that produces content in different languages. AI is able to make that work much easier, and I think if we continue delaying, we risk a new form of like digital colonialism, where our narratives as Africans will be filtered through the algorithms that don't understand our contexts, our nuances, etc. But there's an opportunity here as African journalists, let me say, because we are accustomed to doing more with less. And so we are in a unique position, to lead the world in a resource efficient AI era, whereas, in the West, they've got billions of money, they've got the big teams, and they're able to do all this work. Whereas we are able to pull back and say, listen, with the limited resource that we have, how can we solve, for example, distribution by using AI to bridge the gap between news and traditional radio or SMS? You think about how we did it with banking, where we leapfrog a lot of technologies. I think as Africa or as African news organizations, we would be able to do that as well with AI.
How do we do this though? Because I think that's always the question that like we always have with regard to technology, that yes, we see all the benefits, etc., but how do we bridge that gap? And I guess that kind of like is going to cite more on the work that you guys do at Journalism AI. But yeah, how do we kind of try to catch up, like in AI or when it comes to journalism, to ensure that we reap the benefits of the technology?
I think we need to invest a bit more in research and development. And I always say that I always compare journalism to other industries, where in other industries, a lot of organizations have R&D departments. You go into a newsroom, a lot of them don't have R&D departments. And so that is a place where we could start, where, we can document processes and workflows and systems that have taken place before and go back and say, these were the learnings when social media came to the fore. How do we avoid repeating the same mistakes that we did with social media with AI? That is one way of looking at it. In as much as, yes, there are still huge infrastructure gaps, we can leapfrog a lot of those, if we do proper research, we implement a proper strategy and proper governance within organizations. I think we would be able to get to a point where we can become competitive with the rest of the world.
And also, again, like to go back to the chat that we had about like kind of like trying to strike a balance in that, yes, it's great to like adopt, like AI, etc. But also like it's also good to kind of like, ensure that principles of journalism that we have, which is that, like every story that goes onto the world, like has been vetted to ensure that like is the right story, are also important, right? In that we can just like adopt whilst, kind of not paying attention to the bad parts of the technology, right?
Yeah, correct. Because I mean, we always have to remember that we as journalists are accountable to the people, and we need to do our almost best to make sure that our content remains accurate, it remains trusted, and that we remain transparent in how we produce our work, how we use the technology, etc. And I think that is our greatest sort of currency, transparency. We need to disclose to our audiences how we do things. And I think if it's done right, we would be able to strengthen the trust that we have with our audiences, especially when it comes to making sure that our content or the information we provide is thoroughly fact-checked. If we use AI platforms, that there's a human in the loop that remains the final authority before we disseminate anything.
The other way that like I kind of try to look at it is that we only speak, like especially in the age of AI, we only speak that, like AI needs like an oversight, like a human oversight. A perfect example of this, like in journalism, like it came about over the weekend, where I think like a story by News 24, I think you've seen it, where they realized or they broke the story that like AI policy, like South Africa had like a couple of reference, which were, hallucinations in there. And I think that really shows you that beyond just how we, like, as the media use the AI, we also have this like incredibly like important role in that we kind of play, the oversight role in ensuring that like our policies around AI are correct, right? The usage of the AI by like corporates around like charts around like surveillance, etc., are also like right. So I think we also play that role again beyond just us using the technology like itself, right?
I think it's everybody, right? It's not even just journalism. I think the challenge in a lot of in many parts of the world is that regulation is currently playing a catch-up game. Still behind. In many countries, it's still non-existent. While we need sort of guardrails against like misinformation and copyright theft, it's important to remember that some laws may stifle innovation in smaller markets, but at the same time, uh, on the continent and in South Africa, we need to sort of pursue sovereign AI strategies that will prioritize like data ownership and protect our media ecosystems from being exploited by global tech giants, etc. And I think this is where like university and civil society become important because they need to act as watchdogs, ensuring that AI doesn't become like a tool for state-sponsored surveillance or propaganda, and in making sure that we still hold government to account. And it goes back to also my point about media literacy. When you make that example about the government publishing the AI policy with non-existent academic sources, it goes back to media literacy, media training, AI literacy, AI training, in showing people how these platforms work. Because we take it for granted that anybody can just open a generative AI platform and just start clicking around and they know what to do. I remember I guess like it goes back to when you're in university and you have to put your work through Turnitin, and it picks up all your plagiarized content. This is the same thing, right? In that we forgetting that the internet doesn't forget, and so whatever you input on the internet, it will be remembered. And we need to go back to training people that originality is still king, proper thorough research is still king. People should think of AI as an assistant rather than a replacement. And in as much as yes, we need to have guardrails, etc., people also need to experiment at home first before trying to do things at work that may backfire on them. And so, in as much as yes, regulation is important, guardrails are important, I think we also need to sort of have that strict line to say, you know what, I'm going to practice this thing at home, make sure I get it right before like trying it out publicly on the internet.
Another point that like I would like to get your thought on, right? You spoke a bit like on training, and I remember back in I think like 24 when ChatGPT was trying to have like the access to the archives of the New York Times to do like training on their models, and I think they kind of tried to offer the New York Times like a pittance. I think it was like $1 million or something like that. And how do you think newsrooms should kind of try to think of training? Do you think it's better to build your own kind of like model, or do they just need to use the pre-existing kind of like technologies to build what they are trying to build, like in terms of like like a chatbot, etc.?
I think it depends, right? It depends on the resources that news organizations have. For like smaller newsrooms, AI adoption isn't about building your own LLMs, etc. It's about smart integration of existing tools, to free up the human reporters from, or free up the reporters rather for doing high impact work. Success looks differently for different newsrooms, and one has to assess where and what skills they have within the organization and how do they build on that. Sometimes it's not just about having a niche tech team. The beauty of, I guess, like being a journalism AI is that we've been able to see various publishers in emerging markets use AI, to turn one investigative piece into dozens of social media assets instantly. I think every newsroom needs to have an AI strategy, not because they need to use every tool or build a tool for themselves, but they need to decide which parts of their unique DNA must remain strictly human and which parts will be AI. And then you decide whether are you going to borrow, are you going to buy, are you going to build? And really, I would leave the building to the big organizations that have the resources, they've got the tech muscles. Everybody else, there are a lot of open source platforms that you can go onto and download and integrate into your CMSs, etc., and use those. There are a lot of platforms that you can buy and use instantly within your organization. And it's just a matter of doing a bit of reading, doing a bit of research, talking to people, and seeing what fits for your actual organization. I think that's the key thing. I think, yeah, we don't need to build, but I think the building, we need to leave it to the tech companies, the government, if there's capacity for it, to build data sets or build LLMs. I think in the Nordics, if I remember correctly, I may be wrong, but they are building their own large language model. But the beauty is they are a group of countries well-resourced, and they're able to do that, an LLM that will work for that region, and for those news organizations in that region. And so if we're able to get to that point, great, but I don't think we all need to be building something. Yes, it's great because it helps with addressing some of the nuances and contexts that are not evident or visible in Western built platforms. But sometimes, there isn't a need.
So it's like trying to kill an ant with a sledgehammer, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So your work at Journalism AI, you support like a lot of smaller newsrooms across the world, right? Can you give me perhaps like one or two case studies?
What we've done is we've built like a case studies database where we try to collect case studies from around the world that people can find on our website, and so people should go there, read it, and see what is relevant to them. But we've worked with a couple of organizations at Journalism AI, especially I think the Innovation Challenge that we launched last year has given us a really unique position in getting an insight into some of the projects that a lot of organizations are working on. When I think about the key ones that are important, I think for me, language is one of those important things. I think about the Republic, which was also on JamLab, and they were also on the Innovation Challenge. They were trying to build like an AI voice converter tool that uses AI to help newsrooms and content creators translate their content into indigenous African languages and audio formats. Because on the continent, or at least in Nigeria, there aren't AI platforms that are trained on Nigerian Pidgin English, or training Yoruba, or in Kenya in Swahili. And so a platform like this addresses a key challenge or a key problem in that region. I think about really a simple, really basic platform in Egypt or in the Middle East called Ask Auntie. And they were trying to really build a chatbot for Arabic speakers to anonymously ask about sexual and reproductive health and rights. The chatbot is sort of styled like an aunt, so, aunts are your favorite person to go to in the family. And so you're able to go to your aunt and ask questions as if you're talking to your aunt, but you're talking to a chatbot, and it's able to give you these questions in a society where it's taboo to talk about these discussions. And so chatting to a chatbot sort of normalizes critical discussions within the Middle East, where you can't really, or it's rare that you can have these type of conversations. There's a lot of examples out there, but those are sort of the two that come to mind that I can share at the moment. But yeah, go to the case studies database. We update that regularly to make sure that people continue to get examples of what is possible with AI.
As to close off our conversation, right, I want to ask you like a really pertinent question in that ever since the dawn of ChatGPT, like in I think November 2022, there's been this like existential question in that, are journalists going to be replaced by AI, right? What's your thoughts on that? Do you think AI is just going to contribute to like efficiency in journalism, or do you think like in a few years we'll just have like newsrooms of like two people and then the rest are just AI bots or like your agents, etc., etc.?
I always go back to how when, like, for example, the Industrial Revolution happened, a lot of jobs ended and a lot of new jobs were created. And I think we are in that era where a lot of jobs are going to end, but a lot of new jobs will be created. So I always say that AI won't replace journalists, but it will replace the journalists who refuse to use AI. Roles that are focused on like the routine creation of news or basic formatting are ones that are at risk. But the reality is human-centric skills like empathy, your investigative intuition, or relationship building can never be more valuable right now than they have never been, because you can't, type a prompt to a source and say, listen, trust me, because I will carry your story properly. That requires a human touch, a human relationship. And so for anybody coming into journalism or still in journalism and trying to rationalize this entire change or process, you have to think about how is my role evolving and what do I need to do to become or to be more valuable. And so we need to become more of product thinkers rather than just conveyors of news. It's no longer about becoming, or it's no longer enough that as Tshepo I can just write a story. I have to understand how that story lives across different platforms and how data informs its reach. That will future-proof your career. Focusing more on the high-level strategy of ethics and complex storytelling. That requires that sort of deep cultural context. So it's important to think widely about how is my role evolving with this technology, and think 10, 20 years from now, how could that look like? And what skills do I need to start building now to be prepared or to be at an advantage when things really change? And it's really just a matter of doing small things that will help you win in the end. Just a little experimenting here and there will help you in the long run, rather than saying, I will change when the time comes.
And also, like, I'm thinking, right, even beyond just the journalist, like, if you look at the business behind the newsroom, I think, AI can work well in things like kind of trying to like come up with like a really strong advertising strategy. You're kind of like trying to build like a business behind the newsroom, and that goes back to our earlier conversation where we say that like it's important for newsrooms to really have like a strong kind of like like business case, and I think AI can help a lot there, right?
Absolutely. I think that the reality is, and I think somebody said this yesterday, I can't remember who I was chatting to, and a lot of people think that this person said that a lot of people think that AI is black magic. It will just solve whatever issues you have. Sorry, but however, AI just amplifies whatever is there already, you know. So if a news organization has a poor relationship with its audience, AI will just help the news organization alienate that audience faster, you know. So the goal is to use AI to handle the commodity of news so that organizations can invest in unique content, you know, that people are actually willing to pay for. And so you need to think about a lot of things of what makes you sustainable, but also think about how to build genuine relationships with your audiences rather than just focusing on, oh, how can we use the technology to be more efficient? You know, it's really about building relationships now more than ever.
Closing question, right? Like in terms of policy, I mean, obviously the SE policy got pulled, but how do you think we should think of the policy, the relationship between like AI and the media, etc., etc.?
I think the honors and the responsibilities on all of us to use the platform responsibly. I think I always say that the tech platforms are not the problem. The problem are the people who use the platform. You and I can use the same platform or the same tools, but we can use them differently. I can use it for good, you can use it for bad, vice versa. And so the onus is on us, all of us as humans, to use AI responsibly. But at the same time, I think, your regulatory organizations are the ones that are able to hold the big tech companies accountable for their content, for the content that their models produce. And so they need to hold them to account, but also help and make sure that local newsrooms have, regulatory sandboxes where they can experiment without the fear of making accidents and getting sued for, trying to experiment. And so there's a need for a fine balance between holding tech companies to account, but also making room for organizations and individuals to experiment and test our technologies to see what works and what doesn't. For the most part, many of us don't know what we're doing and don't understand the technology. And so, we need those who are smarter than us to sort of help us build the literacy and understanding, help us build the guardrails and copyright, and to make sure that responsible AI usage is important and is implemented.
I think that's a great way to close it off. Look, man, I think it's incredible work that you and the team are doing there, like a Journalism AI. And I would like to thank you for coming on and sharing so much that you shared. And man, I wish you all the best that you and the team will be doing throughout 2026 and beyond.
Awesome. Thank you. And I hope this was informative for everybody else.